My best friend was left at the altar, so I stepped forward and said, "I'll marry her." "He's not coming, Stephanie." The words ripped through the hushed silence of the bridal suite like a gunshot. Honoré Senga stood in the doorway, his face pale, holding a crumpled piece of monogrammed stationery. Stephanie Andresen, radiant in a flurry of white tulle and lace, stared back at him, the hopeful smile slowly dissolving from her lips. "What do you mean, Honoré? The ceremony starts in 10 minutes. Alan wouldn't..." She couldn't finish the sentence. The absolute certainty in Honoré's eyes confirmed her worst nightmare. Her fiancé, Alan Olsen, had abandoned her at the altar. The air in the bridal suite, previously thick with the scent of lilies and nervous excitement, suddenly felt suffocating. Stephanie Andresen sank onto the velvet settee, her elaborate gown billowing around her like a deflating cloud. She stared at the note Honoré had handed her. It was brief, cruelly so. "Steph, I'm sorry, I can't do this. It's not you, it's me. I thought I was ready, but I'm not. Please forgive me. Alan." "He left a note," Stephanie whispered, her voice barely audible. "A note, after 5 years." Honoré Senga, her oldest and dearest friend, knelt beside her. He had known Stephanie since they were awkward teenagers trying to navigate the social minefield of high school. He had watched her blossom, watched her fall in love with the charismatic but seemingly unreliable Alan Olsen, and now he was watching her heart shatter. "I'm so sorry, Steph," Honoré said softly, his hand resting gently over hers. He could feel her trembling. Deborah Andrews, Stephanie's mother, burst into the room, her face flushed with panic. "What's going on? The string quartet has played Pachelbel's Canon 3 times. Where is Alan?" She stopped short when she saw her daughter's face and the crumpled paper in her hand. "Oh, dear God, no." "He's gone, Mom," Stephanie said, a chilling calmness replacing her initial shock. "He's not coming." Chaos erupted. Deborah began frantically making phone calls, trying to manage the impending disaster. The bridesmaids, a flurry of agitated silk, fluttered around helplessly. Through it all, Honoré remained anchored by Stephanie's side. He watched the stoic mask she was desperately trying to hold in place. He knew her too well. Beneath the composed exterior, she was breaking. The murmurs outside the heavy oak doors grew louder, turning into a low, restless hum. The guests, over 200 of them, including the formidable Riesing family, Alan's prominent relatives, were getting anxious. "We have to tell them," Stephanie said, standing up. She looked impossibly fragile in the extravagant dress, a sacrificial lamb draped in pearls and lace. "I have to go out there." "Steph, no," Honoré argued, standing up with her. "Let your mother do it. Let me do it. You don't have to face them." "It's my wedding, Honoré. Or rather, my non-wedding." She lifted her chin, a gesture of defiance that didn't quite reach her tear-filled eyes. "I won't cower in here." Honoré watched her walk toward the doors, her steps slightly unsteady. He felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it startled him. He couldn't let her walk out there alone, a spectacle for the pitying eyes of the congregation. As she reached for the handle, Honoré stepped in front of her. "Stephanie, wait." She looked up at him, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice surprisingly steady given the pounding of his heart. "You don't have to go out there and apologize for his cowardice." "What choice do I have?" she asked, a solitary tear finally spilling over. Honoré took a deep breath. An idea, wild and utterly terrifying, had been forming in his mind since the moment he read Alan's note. It was reckless. It was crazy. But looking at Stephanie's devastated face, it was the only thing that made sense. "Marry me," Honoré said. The silence that followed was absolute. The bridesmaids stopped their frantic whispering. Even Deborah froze mid-sentence on her phone. Stephanie stared at him as if he had spoken a foreign language. "What did you just say?" "I said marry me," Honoré repeated, stepping closer. "Don't let him ruin this day. We've been best friends forever. We know each other better than anyone. Why let this beautiful setup, this incredible party, all these people here to celebrate love go to waste?" "Oh no, you're insane," Stephanie breathed, shaking her head. "This isn't a joke." "I've never been more serious," he replied, taking both her hands in his. "I love you, Steph. I always have. Maybe not the way Alan supposedly did, but I love you enough to stand by you, to be your partner, to never, ever walk away when things get hard." He wasn't lying. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He did love her. He had loved her quietly, patiently, pushing his feelings aside when Alan entered the picture, believing that as long as she was happy, he could be content in the background. But Alan had proven unworthy. Stephanie searched his eyes, looking for any sign of mockery, but found only steadfast sincerity. She thought of the humiliation waiting for her on the other side of those doors, the pitying whispers, the cancelled honeymoon, the long, lonely nights ahead. And then she looked at Honore. Solid, dependable, always there. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling. "More sure than I've ever been of anything," Honore replied. Stephanie squeezed his hands, her resolve hardening. "Okay," she said, "let's do it." The collective gasp from the congregation was audible over the strains of the nervous string quartet when the heavy doors of the sanctuary opened. Stephanie emerged, looking radiant, albeit pale. But the shock wasn't just that she was finally appearing, it was the man walking beside her. It wasn't Alan Olsen. It was Honore Senger. A ripple of confusion swept through the pews. Whispers flared like wildfire. Oswald Rising, Alan's imposing father, half rose from his seat in the front row, his face a mask of furious bewilderment. Beside him, his wife, Benigna Borges, clutched her pearls. Honore felt Stephanie's hand tighten on his arm. He covered it with his own, offering silent reassurance as they walked down the long aisle. The walk felt endless. Every eye was on them, dissecting the bizarre tableau. When they reached the altar, the officiant, a kindly older man who looked as confused as the guests, stepped forward hesitantly. "Ms. Andresen, Mr. Senger," he stammered. "There seems to be a change in the proceedings." Stephanie took a steadying breath. "There is. Alan Olsen has chosen not to be here today. However, Honore and I have decided to proceed with a wedding." The sanctuary erupted. The low hum of confusion crescendoed into a roar of shock and indignation, primarily emanating from the Rising side of the aisle. Oswald Rising stormed towards the altar. "What is the meaning of this outrage?" Oswald bellowed, his face purpling. "Where is my son? You cannot just swap grooms as if you are exchanging a defective pair of shoes." "Your son," Honore interjected, stepping slightly in front of Stephanie, left a note and fled. "You are welcome to stay and witness the union of two people who actually want to be together, Mr. Rising. Otherwise, the exit is behind you." The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. For a moment, it seemed Oswald might strike Honore. But the unwavering gaze of the younger man held him off. Sputtering furiously, Oswald turned and marched down the aisle, gesturing for his family to follow. Benigna cast one last venomous look at Stephanie before trailing after her husband. About a third of the guests, mostly Alan's family and friends, departed in a noisy exodus. The remaining guests, Stephanie's family and mutual friends, sat in stunned silence. Stephanie turned to the officiant, her voice remarkably calm. "Shall we begin?" The ceremony was a surreal blur. They spoke the traditional vows, but the words carried a weight neither of them had anticipated. When Honore promised to love and cherish her in sickness and in health, he meant it with every fibre of his being. He realized with a start that he wasn't just saving her from humiliation, he was stepping into a role he had secretly coveted for years. When the officiant finally declared them husband and wife, Honore leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't the passionate, sweeping kiss of a typical newlywed couple. It was gentle, tentative, a promise of support rather than a declaration of fiery romance. Yet, as their lips met, a spark ignited between them, surprising them both. The reception that followed was, predictably, awkward. The grand ballroom, decorated to the nines, felt vast and slightly empty with the missing guests. The atmosphere was less celebratory and more akin to a polite wake. Patrick Olmo, Honore's charismatic friend and unexpected best man, tried to liven things up with a boisterous toast, highlighting the unpredictability of life and the strength of their enduring friendship. It earned polite applause, but the underlying tension remained. Stephanie sat beside Honore at the head table, picking at the elaborate meal. She felt numb. The reality of what she had just done was beginning to sink in. She was married to her best friend, the man she loved, but not like that. At least, she didn't think she did. "You haven't touched your food," Honore observed quietly, noticing her vacant stare. "I don't think I can eat," she confessed. "Honore, what have we done?" "We survived," he replied simply. We got through the hardest part. Did we? She asked, looking at the expectant faces of their remaining guests. Or is the hardest part just beginning? Across the room, Stephanie caught the eye of Hager Spinelli, a notoriously gossipy cousin. Hager was watching them with hawkish intensity, a slight smirk playing on her lips. Stephanie knew exactly what the whispers were saying. She settled. It's a sham. How humiliating. She suddenly felt a desperate need to escape the suffocating room. I need some air, she muttered, pushing back her chair. Honoré watched her hurry towards the terrace doors, his brow furrowed with concern. The grand gesture had saved the day, but the emotional fallout was only just starting. The morning sun streamed mercilessly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the lavish honeymoon suite they had booked for the wedding night. A suite intended for Alan and Stephanie. Honoré woke up on the plush velvet sofa, his back aching slightly. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, the events of the previous day rushing back with dizzying clarity. He was a married man. He looked towards the massive king-sized bed. Stephanie was still asleep, curled into a tight ball amidst the sea of white linens. She looked exhausted, even in slumber. The elaborate updo was gone, her hair falling in a tangled mess around her pale face. He rose quietly and padded into the small kitchenette to start the coffee maker. The silence of the suite was oppressive, a stark contrast to the chaos of the wedding. When he returned to the main room with 2 mugs of coffee, Stephanie was sitting up, staring blankly at the wall. "Morning," Honoré said softly, placing a mug on the nightstand beside her. She flinched slightly, as if surprised to find him there, before pulling the duvet tighter around herself. "Morning." He sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," she admitted, her voice raspy. She picked up the mug and took a tentative sip, and then backed over. "That's a fair assessment," he chuckled humorlessly. Silence stretched between them, thick with unsaid words and awkward realizations. They had been friends for over a decade. They had shared secrets, inside jokes, and countless late-night conversations. But this, waking up as husband and wife, was uncharted territory. "Honoré," Stephanie began, her voice tight, "about yesterday?" "You don't have to say anything," he interrupted quickly, fearing she was about to ask for an annulment before the ink on the marriage certificate was dry. "I know it was crazy. If you want to end this, to just say it was a mistake made under duress. I understand. I won't stand in your way." Stephanie looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Is that what you want?" "No," he answered honestly. "It's not what I want. But I did this for you, Steph. I wanted to protect you. I didn't do it to trap you." She traced the rim of her coffee mug with a slender finger. "I don't feel trapped," she said slowly. "I feel confused, lost, angry. So incredibly angry at Alan." Her voice cracked on his name. "But I don't regret marrying you." Honora felt a small flicker of hope ignite in his chest. "You don't?" "No, you were the only good thing about yesterday." She met his gaze, her eyes searching his. "But Honoré, we need to be realistic. We're best friends. We're not in love." The words stung, even though he knew he should have expected them. He had confessed his feelings at the altar, but in the heat of the moment she hadn't reciprocated, only accepted the lifeline he threw. "Right," he said, masking his disappointment. "Realistic. We can't just pretend this is a normal marriage," she continued, her practical nature asserting itself despite the emotional turmoil. "We need ground rules, boundaries, until we figure out what we're going to do." "Okay," Honoré agreed, leaning back. "What kind of ground rules?" "First," she said, ticking it off on her fingers, "this is a platonic arrangement. We share a living space, we present a united front to the world, especially to Alan's family, who I'm sure are just waiting for us to fail. But that's it." "Agreed," he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "Second, we don't rush into any permanent decisions. We give it 6 months. If, after 6 months, we want to go our separate ways, we file for an amicable divorce. No drama. 6 months. It felt like a ticking clock, but it was better than nothing. 6 months, he repeated. "And third," she added, a sudden intensity in her voice, "we don't keep secrets from each other. Not anymore. We're friends first. That has to survive this, no matter what happens." "Always," Honoré promised. They spent the rest of the morning packing up the remnants of the wedding that wasn't, and preparing to move Stephanie's things into Honoré's spacious apartment. The luxurious honeymoon to Bora Bora had been cancelled, the tickets refunded. Instead of a tropical paradise, they were returning to the familiar yet suddenly strange landscape of their everyday lives. As they loaded the last box into Honoré's car, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. The tinted window rolled down, revealing the sharp, aristocratic features of Daria Good, a high-powered lawyer and Alan's older, formidable half-sister. "Well, well," Daria purred, her voice dripping with condescension. "The happy couple, playing house so soon?" Stephanie stiffened, her hand instinctively gripping Honoré's arm. "What do you want, Daria?" Honoré asked, his tone protective. "I just came to deliver a message," Daria said, slipping a sleek envelope through the crack in the window. It fluttered to the pavement. "From my brother. He wants his ring back, Stephanie, and he wants to make sure you understand that any attempt to stake a claim on his assets based on this little theatrical performance of yours will be met with the full force of my legal team." She didn't wait for a response. The window rolled up and the sedan sped away, leaving Stephanie staring at the envelope on the ground, a cold dread pooling in her stomach. The 6-month clock hadn't just started ticking. It felt like a bomb had just been activated. The heavy, cream-coloured envelope lay on the pavement like a toxic spill. Stephanie stared at it, the warm afternoon sun doing nothing to melt the ice flooding her veins. Honoré bent down, his jaw tight, and retrieved the letter left by Daria Gude. He didn't open it, he simply held it out to Stephanie, offering her the agency Alan had stripped away. With trembling fingers, Stephanie broke the wax seal. The letterhead was stark, bearing the imposing name of Daria's corporate law firm. The words were clinical, devoid of the 5 years of shared history she had with Alan. It formally demanded the return of the 3-carat emerald-cut diamond ring, a raising family heirloom, and explicitly warned against any frivolous claims on Alan's premarital assets, citing the fraudulent nature of her subsequent marriage to Honoré. "Fraudulent?" Stephanie scoffed, her voice brittle. A harsh, humourless laugh escaped her throat. "He runs away, and I'm the fraud." "It's an intimidation tactic, Steph," Honoré said gently, guiding her away from the curb and toward the elevator of his apartment building. "Daria is a shark. She smells blood in the water and wants to make sure you don't bite back. But we aren't going to let her bully you." Once inside Honoré's apartment, a sprawling minimalist loft with exposed brick walls and massive windows overlooking the city skyline, the reality of their situation slammed into Stephanie. There were no traces of her. The leather sofas, the neat stacks of Architectural Digest magazines, the lingering scent of cedar and expensive coffee. It was entirely Honoré's domain. She felt like an intruder in her best friend's life. Honoré directed her to the plush guest bedroom which he had hurriedly cleared out that morning. "Take your time," he told her softly from the doorway. "Unpack whatever you want. This is your space now." When the door clicked shut, Stephanie sat on the edge of the queen-size bed. She looked down at her left hand. The massive diamond Alan had proposed with felt heavier than ever, a manacle of broken promises. Beside it, on her ring finger, sat a simple, thin gold band. Honoré had purchased it from a frantic jeweller 2 hours before the ceremony, a makeshift placeholder that now felt infinitely more valuable than the 3-carat monstrosity. She took a deep breath, gripped the diamond ring and pulled it off. A faint white indentation lingered on her skin, a ghost of her past. She placed the ring on the bedside table. It was over. The physical severing of the tie brought a sudden, violent wave of tears. She wept for the future she had planned, for the humiliation, and for the sheer, terrifying unknown of her present. An hour later, her eyes red and puffy, Stephanie emerged into the living room. Honoré was sitting at the kitchen island with Filip Koronkiewicz, an old college friend who also happened to be a brilliant, albeit fiercely cynical, civil litigation attorney. "Steph," Philip said, standing up to give her a brief, reassuring hug. "I heard about the circus. You look remarkably well for a woman who survived a drive-by emotional shooting." "Thanks, Philip," she murmured, taking the mug of tea Honoré silently slid across the counter. "I showed him Daria's letter," Honoré explained, gesturing to the offending document now flattened on the marble island. Philip adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses and smirked. "It's garbage. Pure, unadulterated posturing. Daria is trying to scare you into silence. You were never married to Alan, so you have zero claim to his assets anyway, which Daria knows perfectly well. The threat is just to establish dominance." "And the ring?" Stephanie asked, her voice raspy. Legally, in this state, an engagement ring is a conditional gift, Philip explained, his tone shifting to professional detachment. The condition was the marriage. Since Alan broke the engagement by not showing up, the law is slightly murky, but generally the person who broke it forfeits the ring. However, Philip leaned forward. Given the rising family's resources, fighting them over a piece of jewellery will drag this out for years in civil court. It will be public, ugly, and relentlessly stressful. Give it back, Stephanie said instantly. I don't want it. I don't want anything from him. Honoré nodded approvingly. I agree. We cut the cord completely. Smart move, Philip agreed, pulling a notepad from his briefcase. I'll draft a formal response to Daria. We return the ring via bonded courier tomorrow morning with a letter stating that you relinquish all claims, past and present, to Alan Olsen. It shuts them down completely. As Philip packed up to leave, he paused at the door, looking between Honoré and Stephanie. Just a word of advice from a lawyer who sees too many messy endings. You two made a huge, very public move. People are going to talk. The Risings are going to spin this to make Alan look like the victim of a manipulative gold digger. You need to keep your story straight, and more importantly, you need to look unbreakable. After Philip left, a heavy silence settled over the apartment. The sun dipped below the skyline, casting long, bruised shadows across the floor. Are you hungry? Honoré asked, breaking the tension. We should eat. I don't think I can, Stephanie admitted, wrapping her arms around herself. Philip is right, isn't he? They're going to tear us apart out there. Honoré crossed the room and stood in front of her. He didn't touch her, respecting the physical boundaries she had implicitly drawn, but his presence was a warm, grounding force. They can try, but they forget one thing, Steph. They are dealing with us. We've fought off high school bullies, college professors, and terrible landlords together. We present a united front, and inside this apartment, it's just you and me. No Risings allowed. For the first time all day, a genuine, albeit fragile smile touched Stephanie's lips. Just you and me. By the end of the first week, the platonic arrangement had settled into a rhythm of polite, excruciating awkwardness. They were like two solitary planets orbiting the same sun, careful never to let their gravitational pulls collide. Honoré made coffee. Stephanie bought groceries. They watched television on opposite ends of the massive leather sofa. It was comfortable, yet the unspoken tension of their wedding day hummed constantly in the background. The outside world, however, was far less restrained. On Thursday morning, Stephanie's phone rang. It was her mother, Deborah, and she was in a state of near hysteria. "Stephanie, you have to do something!" Deborah gasped, her voice echoing as if she were pacing a large, empty room. "I was just at the country club. Hege Spinelli cornered me by the tennis courts." Stephanie groaned, pinching the bridge of her nose. Hege was Alan's cousin by marriage, a woman whose primary source of sustenance seemed to be the misery of others. "What is Hege saying now, Mom?" "She's telling everyone, and I mean everyone, Stephanie, that you and Honoré planned this," Deborah cried. "She's saying that you knew Alan was getting cold feet, and because you couldn't bear to lose the social status, you convinced Honoré to step in so you wouldn't look foolish. She even hinted that you and Honoré have been carrying on an affair for years." A hot spike of fury pierced Stephanie's chest. "That is absurd. That is a disgusting lie." "I know that, and you know that," Deborah reasoned, her voice trembling. "But the society pages don't care about the truth. They care about the scandal. The Risings are using Hege as a mouthpiece to ruin your reputation." When Stephanie relayed the conversation to Honoré that evening over takeout Chinese food, his knuckles turned white around his chopsticks. "Hege Spinelli is a parasite," Honoré said darkly. "But Philip warned us this would happen. They want to control the narrative." Stephanie pushed her noodles around the carton, her appetite vanishing. "How do we fight a rumour mill, Honoré? We can't call all 200 guests and plead our case." "No," Honoré said slowly, a determined glint appearing in his dark eyes. "We don't plead. We show up." He stood up and walked over to the refrigerator, pulling down a heavy, embossed invitation pinned under a magnet. The annual Silver Moon Charity Gala, benefiting the Children's Hospital Foundation. "Tomorrow night," Honora said, tapping the heavy cardstock. "You and Alan were supposed to be the guests of honour at the Rising family table." Stephanie felt the blood drain from her face. "Honoré, no. Half of the city's elite will be there. Oswald and Benina never miss it. It will be a firing squad." "Exactly." Honore countered, moving back to the table and leaning over her. If we hide, we validate Hager's rumors. We look guilty, we look ashamed. If we walk into that ballroom together, heads held high, we take our power back. We show them that you aren't a broken, abandoned bride, and our marriage isn't a dirty little secret. Stephanie stared at him. He was asking her to walk back into the lion's den armed with nothing but silk and bravado, but looking into his steady, unwavering gaze, she found a reservoir of courage she didn't know she possessed. "Okay," she breathed. "We go." The next evening, the apartment was transformed into a war room. Stephanie had called in the heavy artillery, Aline Oka. Aline was an avant-garde fashion stylist, a whirlwind of vibrant fabrics, bold opinions, and fierce loyalty. "Darling, we are not going for sweet and innocent," Aline declared, tossing a pastel pink gown onto the floor with disdain. "Sweet and innocent gets eaten alive by bitches like Benina Borges. We are going for devastating. We are going for eat your heart out." After 2 hours of pulling, pinning, and painting, Aline stepped back, clapping her hands in delight. Stephanie turned toward the full-length mirror and gasped. Aline had dressed her in a slinky, midnight blue velvet gown that clung to her curves like liquid. It featured a plunging, structured neckline and a dramatic slit up the thigh. It was bold, mature, and undeniably sexy, a far cry from the virginal white tulle of her wedding day. Her blonde hair was swept over one shoulder in old Hollywood waves, and a bold crimson lip completed the armor. When Stephanie walked into the living room, Honore froze. He was adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke charcoal tuxedo, but his hands stilled entirely. His eyes tracked over her, a flash of something dark, possessive, and entirely unplatonic flaring in his gaze before he hastily blinked it away. "You look..." Honore swallowed hard, his voice dropping an octave. "You look incredible, Steph." "Aline's doing," Stephanie said, suddenly hyper-aware of the way the velvet brushed against her skin. She grabbed her silver clutch, her hands shaking slightly. "Ready to face the firing squad?" Honore offered his arm, his expression hardening into a mask of stoic determination. "Let them fire." When the black car pulled up to the Grand Hotel, the flashing of paparazzi cameras was blinding. As Honore helped Stephanie out of the car, the murmurs began immediately. He wrapped his arm securely around her waist, anchoring her against the tide of whispers. They walked into the opulent, crystal-drenched ballroom, and the effect was instantaneous. The string quartet seemed to falter. Conversations died mid-sentence. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the entrance, raking over the woman who was supposed to be a tragic, jilted bride, only to find a breathtaking vision of defiance on the arm of a fiercely protective husband. The battle lines were drawn. The air in the Silver Moon Gala ballroom was thick with expensive perfume and unspoken judgments. Every step Stephanie took felt like wading through molasses. She could feel the eyes of high society dissecting her midnight blue dress, searching for the crack in her armor, waiting for the tears that Daria and Hager had promised would flow. "Keep your chin up," Honore murmured, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. The warmth of his breath sent an involuntary shiver down her spine. "You own this room." They navigated the sea of silk and tuxedos, offering polite nods to acquaintances who stared at them like ghosts. Patrick Olmo, Honore's best man, intercepted them near the champagne fountain, thrusting 2 flutes into their hands. "You two have balls of absolute steel," Patrick grinned, clinking his glass against theirs. "I was placing bets on whether you'd show. The rising table is in the center. Oswald looks like he's chewing on glass." "Let him," Honore said coolly, taking a sip of champagne. The inevitable confrontation happened just before dinner was served. Stephanie was turning away from a polite but strained conversation with a hospital board member when the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Benigna Borges, draped in emeralds that highlighted the coldness of her eyes, glided toward them. Oswald loomed behind her, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and exorbitant scotch. "Stephanie," Benigna said, her voice a purr that barely masked the venom beneath. "I must say, I'm shocked to see you here. It shows a certain lack of shame, wouldn't you agree?" Stephanie felt the velvet of her dress suddenly feeling too tight. She opened her mouth, but Honore stepped slightly in front of her, smoothly inserting himself between Stephanie and the matriarch. "The only people who should feel shame tonight, Benigna, are the ones who raised a coward," Honore said, his voice loud enough to carry to the surrounding tables. The nearby chatter abruptly ceased. Oswald bristled, taking an aggressive step forward. Watch your tone, Singer. You took advantage of a hysterical girl to get your hands on a prize you could never earn yourself. A prize? Honoré's eyes narrowed, his posture rigidly straight. Stephanie is a brilliant, loyal woman. Alan didn't understand her value, and clearly neither do you. I didn't take advantage of anything. I stepped up when your son ran away like a frightened child, and if you or your family ever speak disrespectfully of my wife again, you will find out exactly what kind of man I am. The word wife hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. It wasn't spoken with the hesitance of their apartment. It was a territorial claim, fierce and unyielding. Benina's lips thinned into a pale line. Oswald glared, but finding no weakness in Honoré's icy stare, he grabbed his wife's elbow. Come, Benigna. The air over here is suddenly entirely too common. As the risings retreated, a collective exhale seemed to ripple through the onlookers. Patrick appeared out of nowhere, clapping Honoré heavily on the shoulder. Brutal! Eloquent! 5 stars, mate! Stephanie stood frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. My wife. The way he had said it, the absolute conviction in his defense of her, cracked something open inside her chest. The anger she had carried all week momentarily evaporated, replaced by a profound, overwhelming wave of gratitude. And something else, something terrifyingly close to desire. The rest of the evening was a blur of polite evasions and strained smiles. By the time they escaped back to the sanctuary of Honoré's loft, Stephanie was physically and emotionally exhausted. She kicked off her silver heels in the entryway, the silence of the apartment wrapping around them like a heavy blanket. Honoré loosened his bow tie, running a hand through his dark hair, looking suddenly immensely weary. You were amazing tonight, Stephanie said softly, following him into the dimly lit living room. Thank you for what you said to Oswald. Honoré turned to face her. In the soft amber glow of the city lights filtering through the windows, the distance between them felt dangerously small. I meant every word, Steph. I won't let them treat you like collateral damage. He stepped closer. The air between them thickened, shifting from the comfortable camaraderie of best friends to a charged, heavy electricity. Stephanie looked up at him, her pulse quickening. She noticed, as if for the first time, the sharp angle of his jaw, the faint shadow of stubble, the deep, soulful intensity in his dark eyes. Honoré, she breathed, the word catching in her throat. He raised a hand, his knuckles lightly grazing the soft skin of her cheek. The touch was agonizingly tender. We said 6 months, Steph. We said platonic. His voice was a raw, strained whisper. But God help me. When I saw you in that dress tonight. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The air was practically vibrating. Stephanie leaned imperceptibly into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. The rational part of her brain, the part that demanded rules and boundaries and safety, was being drowned out by the intoxicating warmth of his proximity. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips. The space between them closed to a fraction of an inch. She could taste the champagne on his breath. Busy. The harsh mechanical vibration of Stephanie's phone in her clutch shattered the moment like a brick through a window. They jumped apart, chest heaving, the sudden influx of cold air between them startling. Honoré cursed softly under his breath, turning away to pinch the bridge of his nose. Stephanie, her hands trembling, fumbled with the clasp of her silver bag. She pulled out the glowing phone, desperate for the distraction, desperate to hide the flush burning on her cheeks. She looked at the screen. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale and cold in the midnight blue velvet. Who is it? Honoré asked, noting her sudden pallor. Stephanie swallowed hard, her throat suddenly parched. She stared at the name glowing in the dark room, a ghost rising from the grave to haunt them. It's Alan, she whispered. The name glowing on the screen of Stephanie's phone felt like a curse. Alan. The letters blurred as her hand trembled. The charged magnetic atmosphere in Honoré's apartment evaporated, replaced by a sudden, freezing vacuum. Answer it! Honoré said, his voice stripped of the husky warmth from moments before. He took a deliberate step back, crossing his arms over his chest, his posture defensively rigid. If you don't, he'll just keep calling. Stephanie swiped the screen with a thumb that felt completely numb and lifted the phone to her ear. Hello. Steph. Alan's voice cracked over the line. It wasn't the confident, polished tone of the golden boy she had known for 5 years. He sounded hollow, frantic, and breathless. Steph, please don't hang up. Please. Hearing his voice, the voice that had whispered promises in the dark and then vanished on the most important day of her life, sent a sickening jolt through her system. "What do you want, Alan? You made your choices perfectly clear a week ago." "I made a mistake. A massive, stupid, unforgivable mistake," Alan pleaded. The background noise sounded like a busy airport terminal. I panicked. My father, the expectations, the absolute circus of the wedding, it suffocated me. I had a panic attack, Steph. I just ran. I've been in a hotel in London for a week, just drinking and hating myself. Stephanie closed her eyes, leaning back against the cool wall of the entryway. A week ago, this apology would have been her salvation. Now it just sounded pathetic. "And what changed your mind tonight, Alan?" There was a heavy pause on the line. "I saw the photos from the Silver Moon Gala, the ones online." His voice hitched, a mixture of jealousy and sorrow leaking through. "I saw you with him. I saw you with Honore, looking so beautiful, and it hit me that I threw away the only real thing in my life. You're my fiancé, Steph, not his wife. This whole thing with Honore is just a reaction to what I did. I'm coming home. I land in 3 hours. Please meet me. Let me explain. Let me fix this." Stephanie opened her eyes and looked at Honore. He was watching her intensely, a muscle feathering in his clenched jaw. He was waiting for her to break. He was waiting for her to go back to the man she had planned to spend her life with. "I will meet you," Stephanie said slowly, her voice devoid of emotion. "Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, at the Roasted Bean Cafe on 4th. Not a second later." "Thank you, Steph. Thank you. I love—" She ended the call before he could finish the sentence. She dropped the phone back into her silver clutch and looked up at Honore. The silence in the room was deafening. "He wants to meet," she said quietly. "He says he made a mistake. He saw the photos from tonight." Honore's eyes darkened, a flash of pure, unadulterated anger crossing his features before he ruthlessly suppressed it. He nodded once, a sharp, jerky movement. Of course he did. He realized another man stepped up to claim what he was too cowardly to hold. Honore turned away, walking toward the kitchen, putting distance between them. "You should hear him out. It's the only way you'll get closure." "Closure?" Stephanie echoed, hurt flaring in her chest. How could he just step back so easily after almost kissing her? "Is that what you think I want?" Honore gripped the edge of the marble island, his knuckles white. "I think you spent 5 years building a life with a man. I think you deserve to hear why he tore it down. And I think—" He swallowed hard, his back still to her. "I think we agreed this was a temporary arrangement to protect you. If Alan is ready to step up, my job here is done." The words felt like a physical blow. "My job here is done." She wanted to scream that he wasn't doing a job, that he was her husband, that the look in his eyes 10 minutes ago hadn't been about protection. It had been about passion. But the vulnerability of the moment had shattered. "Fine," Stephanie whispered, turning toward the guest bedroom. "I'll see him tomorrow." The rain was coming down in sheets the next morning, turning the city into a blur of grey and neon. Stephanie sat in a booth at the back of the small, unassuming cafe, wrapping her hands around a lukewarm mug of herbal tea. She wore simple jeans and a beige trench coat, a stark contrast to the midnight blue armour she had worn the night before. At exactly 10:05 a.m, the bell above the door chimed, and Alan walked in. Stephanie's breath caught, but not out of longing. It was shock. The Alan Olsen she knew was perpetually immaculate. Bespoke suits, perfectly styled hair, an aura of invincible arrogance. The man standing before her looked ruined. His clothes were wrinkled, dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and he had a nervous, jittery energy that made him look a decade older. He spotted her and rushed over, sliding into the booth opposite her. "Steph! God, it's good to see you!" He reached across the table to take her hands. Stephanie smoothly pulled her hands back, letting them rest in her lap. "You have 15 minutes, Alan." Alan flinched. He spent the next 10 minutes pouring out his heart. He talked about the pressure of the rising legacy, the fear of losing his youth, the momentary insanity that drove him to the airport instead of the altar. He begged for forgiveness. He promised to buy a house far away from his parents, to go to therapy, to make it up to her for the rest of his life. "We can annul this ridiculous marriage to Honore," Alan urged, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "My lawyers said it's easy, given the circumstances. It's obviously not a real marriage. We can go to a courthouse next week, just the two of us." Stephanie sat silently, listening to the man she had almost married. She waited for the familiar tug on her heartstrings, the instinct to comfort him, the overwhelming love she had felt for 5 years. But it wasn't there. There was only a profound, hollow pity. "Alan," she started, preparing to tell him that it was truly over. Before she could form the words, the cafe door chimed again. A figure in a razor-sharp, tailored black suit and a dripping umbrella stepped inside. It was Daria Goudet. Alan's face drained of what little colour it had left. He shrank back into the booth. "Daria, what are you doing here?" Daria glided over to their table, ignoring her half-brother completely, and fixed her cold gaze on Stephanie. I see he's playing the repentant lover. Did he get to the part where he promises to buy you a house?" "Daria, shut up," Alan hissed, looking terrified. Stephanie frowned, her pulse quickening. "What is going on here?" Daria scoffed, pulling a pristine white envelope from her designer bag and tossing it onto the table. "Don't flatter yourself, Stephanie. My brother didn't fly back from London because he suddenly realised you were the love of his life. He flew back because Oswald froze his trust fund." Stephanie stared at the envelope, then at Alan. "What?" "Last night," Daria explained, her tone dripping with boredom, "you and Honoré Senga embarrassed our father at the most important social event of the season. Honoré made Alan look like a weak, pathetic child. Oswald called Alan in London at 2 a.m. He told him that unless he returned immediately, won you back and annulled this PR nightmare of a marriage to Honoré, he would be cut out of the rising fortune permanently." Alan buried his face in his hands, letting out a stifled sob. He didn't deny it. "The rising family cannot have a narrative where we are the villains who get bested by a common architect," Daria continued ruthlessly. "We need the narrative to be that it was a lover's quarrel, a misunderstanding, and true love prevailed. So name your price, Stephanie. How much to sign the annulment papers and take this pathetic excuse for a man back?" A wave of nausea washed over Stephanie, followed instantly by a searing, brilliant flash of clarity. She looked at Alan, cowering, weak, willing to buy her back to save his allowance. And then she thought of Honoré. Honoré, who stood between her and Oswald Rising. Honoré, who risked his own reputation to shield hers. Honoré, who looked at her in a velvet dress like she was the only woman on earth. Stephanie stood up. She didn't feel broken anymore. She felt invincible. "There is no price, Daria," Stephanie said, her voice ringing out clearly over the jazz music of the cafe. "Because my marriage to Honoré isn't a PR stunt, and it's not a sham." She looked down at Alan, feeling the last invisible thread between them snap. "You can keep your money, Alan, and you can keep your family. I already have a husband who acts like a man." She turned on her heel and walked out of the cafe, stepping into the pouring rain. She didn't look back. Stephanie practically ran the 6 blocks to Honoré's apartment building, not caring that her hair was plastered to her face or that her trench coat was soaked through. She burst through the front doors, bypassed the elevator, and sprinted up the 3 flights of stairs to the loft. She keyed in the code and threw the door open. "Honoré!" The apartment was terrifyingly quiet. She walked into the living room, her heart hammering against her ribs. Honoré was emerging from his bedroom. He was wearing a dark sweater and jeans, and in his hand was a leather duffel bag. Stephanie froze, the breath knocked out of her. "What are you doing?" Honoré stopped, his eyes widening as he took in her drenched, dishevelled appearance. He set the bag down slowly. I packed some things. I thought I would stay at Patrick's place for a few days, give you some space to move your things or figure things out with Alan." He looked away, his jaw tight. "I didn't want to make it harder for you. I told you 6 months. Or until you didn't need me anymore." "You idiot," Stephanie breathed, a mixture of a laugh and a sob escaping her lips. She crossed the room in 3 long strides, closing the distance between them until she was inches away from his chest. She grabbed the collar of his sweater, forcing him to look down into her eyes. "I just left Alan at a coffee shop," she said, the words tumbling out of her in a rush. "Do you want to know why he came back? His father cut off his trust fund because of what you did at the gala. He only wanted me back to save his inheritance and his family's pride." Honoré's expression darkened with fury. "I'll kill him." "No, you won't," Stephanie said fiercely, shaking him slightly. "Because he doesn't matter. Honoré, listen to me. It wouldn't have mattered if he came back with the purest intentions in the world. It wouldn't have mattered because of last night, because of the last week." Honoré stared at her, his breath catching. Steph. You said you stepped up to protect me, she continued, tears finally mixing with the rain on her cheeks. But you did more than that. You showed me what a real partner is. You showed me what it feels like to be truly chosen, to be defended, to be respected. I don't want an annulment. I don't want a divorce in 6 months. And I definitely don't want a platonic arrangement anymore. Honoré dropped his hands to her waist, pulling her flush against his body. His eyes searched hers, blazing with an intensity that made her weak in the knees. Are you sure? Steph, don't say this just because you're angry at him. I can't be your fallback. I love you too much for that. You were never a fallback, she whispered, lifting her hands to cup his face, her thumbs tracing the sharp line of his jaw. You were the man I was supposed to marry all along. It just took a disaster for me to open my eyes. A raw, ragged sound escaped Honoré's throat. He didn't hesitate anymore. He leaned down and captured her lips, and this time there was no ringing phone to interrupt them. The kiss was nothing like the gentle, tentative promise at the altar. It was a torrential release of years of pent-up longing, fierce and desperately passionate. He tasted like coffee and rain and absolute devotion. Stephanie kissed him back with equal fervour, her hands burying themselves in his dark hair as he backed her up against the edge of the kitchen island. The platonic wall they had so carefully constructed didn't just crack, it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. As Honoré lifted her effortlessly onto the marble counter, deepening the kiss, Stephanie realized that being left at the altar wasn't the tragedy of her life. It was the greatest twist of fate, clearing the path for the greatest love she would ever know. 1 year later, the sprawling minimalist loft was no longer just Honoré's domain. It was cluttered with vibrant throw pillows, a secondary coffee machine, and framed photos of their actual honeymoon in Italy. Stephanie stood by the massive windows, adjusting the simple gold band on her left hand, watching the city below. Honoré wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, pressing a soft kiss to her neck. There were no raisings, no rumours, no toxic legacies. There was only the undeniable truth that sometimes the end of the world is just the beginning of everything you ever needed. Thank you so much for watching this emotional journey of heartbreak, loyalty, and unexpected love. If Stephanie and Honoré's story touched your heart, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder about true self-worth, and subscribe to the channel for more dramatic and romantic stories every week. Let me know in the comments below. Would you have the courage to step up for your best friend like Honoré did? See you in the next video.